Humanity, fragile yet unyielding, scarred yet stronger. Stories beyond imagination.
The Terrans, they have advanced beyond all known limits.
The chamber of the celestial Concord was carved into the heart of a living asteroid, its crystalline walls pulsing with light that responded to the thoughts of its delegates. It was said no structure in the galaxy held greater weight, for here decisions were made that steered civilizations across thousands of systems. On this particular cycle, the chamber was suffused with unease. Whispers darted from winged throats, resonated through insectoid carapaces, and shimmered in the vibrations of crystalline diplomats. The agenda was simple yet dire: humanity. Reports had poured in from exploratory fleets, from border colonies, from those foolish enough to test this young species militarily. Each account contradicted the comfortable assumptions of the conquered. They had believed Earth's inhabitants to be fragile mammals, bound to a single backwater planet, wielding crude technology compared to the ancient empires of the stars. Yet somehow these primitives had faced wars of attrition that would have extinguished any other race, survived environments their own biologies could not endure, and wielded violence not as a last resort but as an art form. Representatives shifted on their perches and thrones, uncertain whether they were here to deliberate the assimilation of a junior species or to debate how long they themselves might survive its inevitable rise. For once, no one dared call them weak. The first detailed reports had arrived from the frontier skirmish at Rho-Cygnus, where a minor insectoid empire had sought to test human resolve. The attackers had calculated an easy victory, their fleets outnumbered, Earth's expeditionary force 3-1, their weapons had been honed over centuries of conquest, and their biology was adapted for endurance unmatched by most sentients. Yet the humans had not broken. Their ships fought as if each were a cornered beast, unleashing torrents of fire even as their hulls split apart. Survivors later recalled the haunting sight of Terran Marines, boarding vessels even after their own oxygen had vented into space, armed with nothing but blades and sheer will. When the battle was over, the insectoid empire had withdrawn with heavy losses, stunned that such a primitive people had refused to yield. It was not the scale of their technology that unsettled observers. It was the depth of their defiance. Other species accepted defeat when logic dictated it. Humans seemed to wage war with something beyond logic, something irrational, primal, and terrifyingly effective. The Conquered had quietly filed away the report, dismissing it as an anomaly. But anomalies multiplied. Each conflict painted the same pattern: humanity's ability to suffer losses that would have crushed entire civilizations, yet still rise with red eyes burning, as though the destruction only hardened their will. By the time the Jalari crystalline envoys presented their analysis, even the most arrogant of the elder species had begun to reconsider. The Jalari had no concept of violence themselves. They were scholars who observed wars like astronomers observed stars. Their findings were delivered not in words but in shifting harmonics of light that filled the chamber with chilling resonance. Humans possess a singular evolutionary advantage. Where most species flee from pain, they adapt. Where most minds break under trauma, theirs grow calloused. Suffering does not merely wound them, it forges them. Delegates listened in silence as the crystalline patterns danced across the chamber walls, replaying images of human history. Wars fought not over resources alone, but ideals. Civilizations rebuilt from ashes. Individuals sacrificing themselves so that strangers might live. No other species had cultivated such a paradox, simultaneously capable of savage cruelty and transcendent compassion. To the Jalari, this was the root of their terror. Humans had no natural ceiling. Most species plateaued once their societies stabilized. Humanity, however, seemed to grow sharper the more they were tested, like a blade hammered endlessly against an anvil. The chamber trembled with unease as the lights faded. No one questioned whether the report was true. The only question that lingered, spoken in the fearful stillness of alien minds, was how long before humanity turned, its gaze fully outward. The insectoid Qatar delegate rose next, his mandibles clicking in agitation as his multifaceted eyes scanned the chamber. His people had been among the first to underestimate humanity, and the scars of that mistake still lingered on their border worlds. "We believed them bound by frailty," he hissed, his voice echoing like steel scraping stone. "We thought their bones brittle, their flesh weak, their technology laughably crude. Yet in our arrogance, we mistook endurance for weakness. Their bodies break easily, yes, but they heal. They scar, they adapt. What is more, they do not fear death as we do. They treat it as an old companion, a cost willingly paid if the cause demands it." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Qatar delegate's mandibles quivered before he added, "We slaughtered their soldiers, burned their colonies, shattered their fleets, and still they came. Not just the warriors. Farmers took up arms. Children carried messages through bombardments. Civilians became combatants with nothing more than fire in their eyes. Tell me, esteemed delegates, what weapon do you possess against a species where every citizen can become a soldier at a moment's notice?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the most battle-hardened empires understood the implication. Against such a foe, numbers and strategy became meaningless. You could kill millions, yet the survivors would crawl from the ruins, bloody and broken, ready to strike back. Humanity was not a force to be contained. It was a wildfire that grew stronger the more fuel was thrown upon it. The Veyari, amphibious scholars known for their detached pragmatism, provided a different angle. Their envoy, seated upon a throne of liquid-filled crystal, released a low, undulating hum. "It is not merely their ability to fight that should alarm us," the Veyari intoned, their gills fluttering with each word. "It is their mind. Humanity does not merely survive catastrophe, it innovates because of catastrophe. Their history is a cycle of self-destruction followed by rebirth, each time stronger, more ruthless, more cunning. They invent weapons not because they must, but because they imagine threats that do not yet exist." The chamber shuddered at the weight of those words. The Veyari projection displayed human schematics, siege engines carved in the age of swords, nuclear fire unleashed before they even left their homeworld, machines capable of scouring cities long before they reached the stars. "What you call savagery, they call progress," the envoy continued. "They do not wait for danger to come. They prepare for it, anticipate it, even court it. For humanity, peace is not the natural state. It is merely the pause between wars." Gasps filled the air as delegates contemplated this dreadful truth. The Veyari's voice dropped into a near whisper, yet it resonated like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. "Ask yourselves, wise representatives of the conquered, what happens when a species whose very identity is shaped by struggle finds itself with no more enemies among its own kind? Will they not seek conflict beyond their skies? Will they not look upon us next?" The counselors did not answer immediately. Even the elder races, those who had seen empires rise and collapse like waves against eternity, remained uneasy. It was the Zelthari who finally spoke. Unlike others, they had not engaged humanity directly, yet they had studied them with the cold detachment of predators observing prey. The Zeltari envoy, a serpentine creature draped in scales that shimmered like molten gold, allowed a thin smile to crease its fanged mouth. "You speak of their strength as if it were inevitable," it hissed. "But remember, strength can be turned. Fire can be smothered. Wild beasts can be tamed." Its eyes glinted with arrogance. "What are humans but savages with clever tools? Yes, they endure. Yes, they fight. But the Concord has endured longer. We have bent countless species to our order. Humanity will be no different." A murmur of uneasy agreement rippled among the younger empires, desperate for reassurance. Yet the older civilizations remained grimly silent. They had seen the reports in fuller detail. Human rebellions that grew fiercer after suppression. Colonies that became deadlier after bombardment. Fleets rebuilt from scrap in record time. Fire could be smothered. Yes, but smothering humanity only seemed to make them burn hotter. The Zelthari's confidence was not shared by those who had tasted Terran defiance firsthand. The insectoid delegate's mandibles snapped angrily. "Try to tame them," he spat. The next testimony came from the Morinth, a species renowned for their psychic acuity. Where others measured strength in fleets and weapons, the Morinth measured it in the turbulence of the mind. Their envoy rose, its form a misty projection of thought itself. "We touch their minds," it whispered. the sound threading through the chamber like a cold wind. We reached into their dreams, as we have done with countless species before. We expected chaos, confusion, fear. Instead, we found walls. Walls of iron, walls of fire, walls that bled but would not fall. A shiver spread across the chamber. In most minds, pain is a scar we can unravel. In humans, pain is a fortress. Trauma does not weaken them, it strengthens them. Their memories of loss, grief, and agony are not vulnerabilities but weapons they turn inward, shaping themselves into something harder. We tried to break them with visions of despair. Instead, they used those visions to steel their resolve. We have never encountered such a thing. The Morinth envoy's form flickered, its voice breaking into a note of unease. And their dreams. Oh, their dreams are worse. Other species dream of peace, of comfort, of escape. Humans dream of victory, of struggle, of triumph carved from agony. Tell me, Concord, how do you defeat a people who dream not of rest, but of conquest? The chamber had grown colder, though no temperature shift had occurred. Fear was spreading like a contagion, settling even into those who had once dismissed the human threat. It was then that the Thryn delegate, representing a species older than most empires combined, spoke with the weight of millennia in its voice. You forget, it rumbled, its body of stone grinding as it moved, that we too were once young. We too fought and bled and clawed our way to survival. Humanity is not unique. They are simply walking the path all warriors walk. The words were meant as comfort, but none took them as such. For if what the Thryn said was true, then humanity was not an anomaly, they were destiny. The natural evolution of struggle, the inevitable endpoint of pain. What unsettled the Concord was not that humans were strong, but that they embodied what every species might have been if stripped of hesitation, if refined by endless conflict without reprieve. They were the mirror in which all others saw what they could never become. And if humanity truly was only the beginning of a long ascent, then what heights might they yet climb? The Thryn's gravelly voice settled into silence, and the chamber once more echoed only with the soft hum of the living asteroid. None dared to speak against it. To do so would be to deny what their hearts already knew, that they were looking not upon savages, but upon inevitability. At last, the presiding chancellor of the Concord raised her many arms, demanding order. Her voice carried the authority of 1,000 years of unchallenged rule. Yet even she could not conceal the tremor in her tone. We convene not to admire humanity, she said, but to decide what shall be done. Shall we accept them as equals? Shall we contain them? Shall we destroy them before they destroy us? The bluntness of her words rang through the chamber like a blade striking stone. 1,000 eyes turned inward, each mind calculating probabilities, futures, survival. The debate fractured immediately. Some cried for diplomacy, arguing that to make humanity an ally was safer than making them an enemy. Others hissed for annihilation, urging that no risk was greater than leaving this wildfire unchecked. A smaller faction, proud and arrogant, still muttered that humanity was exaggerated, a myth born from frightened colonies, but their voices were drowned beneath the rising tide of dread. Reports were stacked like mountains in the archives, each testifying to the same grim truth. Humans could not be broken by fear. By loss, by any logic, the galaxy understood. And so the Chancellor's question hung in the air like a guillotine. What do you do when faced with a species that thrives on the very things that destroy all others? From the rear of the chamber came a rasping voice, one that many wished had remained silent. It was the envoy of the Drac, a warlike reptilian species long regarded as brutes even among the Concord. Their fleets had once darkened entire sectors, but centuries of attrition had tempered them into something bitter and cunning. You deliberate as if you have a choice, the Drac sneered, its tongue flicking between jagged teeth. We fought them. Not once, not twice, but thrice. Each time we believed we had crushed them. Each time they returned sharper, deadlier, more merciless. Do you know what they told us before their last assault? They thanked us. Thanked us for teaching them how to fight better. The chamber recoiled as if struck. The Drac's eyes narrowed into slits. We have waged war for millennia, yet never have we seen an enemy who learns so quickly, who uses their defeats as training grounds. Strike them, and they rise stronger. Bleed them, and they bleed poison into your own ranks. Kill them and they die smiling because death itself becomes their lesson to those who remain. A long silence followed. In that silence, the truth solidified. This was not merely a species of survivors. Humanity was a species that thrived on adversity, whose entire history was a litany of scars turned into stepping stones. The shy, a delicate race of winged philosophers, finally fluttered forward, their gossamer forms glowing faintly with sorrow. Unlike others, they had not fought humanity, nor studied them as prey. Instead, they had listened to intercepted broadcasts, to songs, to stories carried on the cosmic winds. "You misunderstand them," the Shay said softly, their voice like a mournful chime. "You see only their wars, their blood, their unyielding cruelty, but listen deeper, and you will hear something else. Love, unity, sacrifice. For every tale of slaughter, there is one of defiance in the name of another. For every city burned, there is one rebuilt from ashes by hands blistered and bleeding. You fear their hunger for war, but perhaps you should fear more their hunger for meaning." Murmurs stirred. Many found the words unsettling in ways they could not name. "What drives them is not conquest alone," the Shay continued, wings trembling. "It is the belief that suffering must not be wasted. That struggle must serve a purpose. They bleed for one another, die for one another, fight not just for themselves, but for futures they may never live to see. Can any of you say the same of your own kind?" The question hovered like a blade over the gathering, for in their hearts, the delegates knew most of their species fought for dominance. For territory, for pride, humanity fought for something greater, and that made them far more dangerous. Debates flared, voices rising in a storm of languages, clicks, hums, and resonant frequencies. Some still pressed for extermination, insisting humanity could not be permitted to spread unchecked. Others argued that extermination would be futile, that such an attempt would only ignite humanity into a fury that could never again be contained. A few dared to suggest an alliance, but even those words sounded hollow in their mouths. Who could ever claim to bind such a force? As the chamber roared with clashing opinions, the Chancellor called for silence once more. Her many arms trembled as she raised them high. "Enough! You have spoken of their strength, their cruelty, their compassion. But we sit here forgetting one truth above all others." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into the stillness. "Humanity is not here." That realization fell upon the assembly like a stone into a still lake. Indeed, they debated and dissected a species that was not even present to defend itself, not by choice, but because humanity had not asked to join them. They had not pleaded for recognition. They had not begged for a place in the Concord. They were too busy building, fighting, surviving. The Chancellor's voice dropped to a whisper that every ear strained to hear. "We speak of what to do with humanity, but has it not occurred to you that one day they may speak of what to do with us?" The notion spread like a ripple of fire through dry grass. For countless ages, the Concord had been the center of galactic order, dictating the fate of emerging civilizations. Never had it occurred to them that the balance might one day tip in the opposite direction. The insectoid delegate, his mandibles grinding nervously, voiced what many dared not. "If they are, as you all claim, unyielding, adaptive, driven by purpose, then it is not a question of if. It is a question of when." A shudder moved through the chamber. The Crystalline Scholars flared with cold light, echoing the sentiment in harmonic tones. Yes, when humanity's gaze turns outward, the conquered will no longer be the one holding judgment. We shall be the accused. The room fell into oppressive silence. Images surfaced unbidden in every mind. Terran fleets blotting out stars. Armies of humans descending upon worlds. Their battle cries carrying the weight of every scar. Every struggle, every loss turned into fuel. And perhaps worse than the image of war was the image of humanity not as conquerors, but as judges, deciding which species were worthy of survival and which were not. For a brief moment, all the gathered powers, empires, monarchies, republics felt themselves no longer as rulers but as prey. In desperation, one of the younger delegates, a representative of the fragile, Lyran people, stood and cried out, "Then let us act now! Strike their worlds before they grow stronger! Crush their fleets while they are few!" The outburst drew immediate attention, and for a heartbeat, Many nodded in fearful agreement. But then the Qatar delegate hissed bitter laughter. "We tried," he said, mandibles snapping. "We struck their colonies. We slaughtered their soldiers. We thought their weakness lay in their small numbers. And yet they rose, fiercer than before. Do you not understand? To strike them is to make them stronger. Every wound you deal them becomes a lesson. Every city you burn becomes a story of defiance told to their children. They are not weakened by our violence. They are tempered by it." The Lyran faltered, wings drooping in despair. The chamber shifted uneasily, realization dawning upon even the most stubborn minds. Humanity could not be destroyed without consequence. Every act of suppression, every attempt at annihilation, would only forge the humans into something even more terrifying. Their resilience was not a shield, it was a weapon, one more potent than any plasma cannon or dreadnought. To fight them was to sharpen them. To ignore them was to give them time. To ally with them was to risk being consumed by their fire. The chamber stood trapped in the impossible triangle of choices. And so the counselors did what all beings do when faced with terror too. Vast to confront directly, they postponed. They declared no verdict that day, no unified decision. Instead, they agreed to observe, to monitor, to wait and see. But beneath those words, every delegate knew what they truly meant. They were afraid. Afraid to provoke humanity into greater wrath, afraid to embrace them and be drawn into their storms, afraid even to speak too loudly of them lest the Terrans somehow overhear across the void. Outside the chamber, whispers spread through the Concord citizens like wildfire. Stories twisted and grew in the retelling. Humans who drank fire, who could fight without air, who turned even death into victory. Across 1,000 worlds, children woke from nightmares of Terran fleets blotting out suns, while soldiers on frontier lines sharpened their weapons with trembling hands. And on Earth, blissfully, or perhaps deliberately, ignorant of the debates raging light years away, humanity continued exactly as it always had, struggling, fighting, building, bleeding, laughing, loving. They had no idea that the galaxy trembled at their name. Or perhaps they did and simply didn't care, for humanity had never asked permission to survive. As weeks passed after the Concord's indecision, frontier worlds began reporting strange patterns. Human ships, though fewer in number, appeared in places no fleet should have reached. They slipped past blockades, navigated uncharted maelstroms, and established colonies on worlds deemed uninhabitable. Poisonous atmospheres, crushing gravity, freezing nights, conditions that would annihilate most species were little more than challenges for the Terrans. They brought machines, yes, but also their own stubborn biology. Where filters failed, lungs adapted. Where bones cracked, they healed denser. Where others saw death, humanity carved out life. Reports filtered back of settlements thriving where even Concord engineers had abandoned projects. Each new account only deepened the fear. It was no longer just humanity's warriors that terrified the galaxy. It was the horrifying realization that their civilians, their farmers, their children carried the same defiance. This was not merely a warrior culture, it was a warrior species. The council reconvened in secret, though the secrecy fooled no one. This time there was no debate over whether humanity was dangerous. That much was no longer questioned. Instead, they argued over strategy. Some pressed for covert sabotage, others for enforced quarantine, still others for an uneasy alliance. But none could ignore the words of the Morinth, who reminded them of what they had seen in human minds. "They do not think as we do," the envoy said. "When we plot, they improvise. When we delay, they act. When we hesitate, they strike. They are unpredictable, and unpredictability is the sharpest blade." The chamber rippled with unease. Unpredictable enemies could be outmaneuvered, but an unpredictable species? That was chaos incarnate. To align with them was to dance on the edge of a blade. To oppose them was to risk being consumed by fire, and to do nothing was to let that fire spread unchecked. The chamber stood paralyzed, caught between fear of action and fear of inaction. On the distant colony of Icarus Prime, the first great test came. A rogue warlord, not of the Concord, but a remnant from an old empire, chose to strike the Terrans. His fleet descended upon the fledgling human settlement, confident that these newcomers would scatter like frightened prey. Instead, the galaxy watched in horror as the opposite unfolded. Civilians rallied beside soldiers. Children ferried ammunition. Engineers turned mining lasers into weapons of war. The battle lasted days, then weeks. When the smoke cleared, the warlord's fleet was shattered and the humans still stood. Worse, they had captured ships, reverse-engineered weapons, and learned strategies. What should have been a warning to humanity instead became a warning to the galaxy. Every battle with Terrans, win or lose, only fed their arsenal of experience. The survivors of Etheris Prime did not just rebuild, they celebrated. They called it their proving ground. And in the Concord chamber, realization spread like a plague. The humans did not fear tests. They welcomed them. In the wake of Etheris Prime, stories spread faster than light. Some were exaggerated, others entirely fabricated, but all carried the same theme. Humanity could not be broken. A tale told of a soldier who fought for hours after being mortally wounded, dragging comrades to safety before collapsing with a grin. Another claimed that humans could consume poisons that would fell giants, turning toxins into nourishment. The most chilling rumor was whispered even among hardened generals, that humans sometimes went into battle expecting not to return, and that they fought harder for it. Suicide warriors, some called them. Madmen, others scoffed. But the reports of soldiers detonating themselves to take enemy strongholds, or pilots ramming crippled ships into enemy dreadnoughts, could not be dismissed. For where most species fought to preserve life, humans were willing, even eager at times, to gamble theirs if it meant victory. And what defense existed against an enemy who valued triumph more than survival? By now, even the proud Zelthari had fallen silent in the chamber. Their earlier boasts of taming humanity had evaporated in the face of mounting evidence. The Chancellor, wearied by endless sessions of dread, demanded clarity. What, she asked, drives them so? Why do they not seek comfort as others do? Why is peace to them but a fleeting pause? For once, no delegate answered immediately. It was the shy who finally whispered, "Because they are still young." The chamber tilted in. Confusion until the Shay continued. Their sun is but a spark compared to our ancient stars. Their empires are infants compared to our dynasties. Youth is restless, reckless, always searching, always reaching. They are not yet tired of the climb. And when they tire, perhaps it will be too late, for by then they may already stand atop us. All. The words struck deep. For in that moment, the Concord realized that they were not staring at an anomaly nor an aberration. They were staring at the natural consequence of youth untempered, a storm still gathering its full force. Beyond the chambers of debate, humanity itself remained unaware or perhaps unconcerned about the growing shadow they cast. On Earth, children still played beneath fragile skies, even as fleets spread outward. On colonies, workers still toiled to build homes in hostile lands. To the Terrans, they were merely living, struggling as they always had. They had no conception that their ordinary perseverance was extraordinary to others, that their stubborn joy amidst hardship appeared monstrous to those who had forgotten how to endure. If they knew, they likely would have laughed. For humanity had never sought to be feared. Fear was irrelevant. Survival was everything, and if their survival frightened others, so be it. They would not apologize for existing. The Conquered, however, could not look away. Intelligence networks compiled endless data, ship movements, colony expansions, intercepted transmissions, and still the question remained unsolved: how to deal with them. Each option led to ruin. Attack them and they would become stronger. Ally with them and risk being overshadowed. Ignore them and watch them grow unchecked. For the first time in eons, the galaxy's rulers faced a puzzle with no solution. Whispers turned to dread. Dread turned to paralysis. And in the cracks of that paralysis, humanity continued its steady, relentless climb outward, unbothered by the cosmic stage upon which their shadows loomed ever larger. Then came the incident at Dravax Station, where a Conquered envoy ship encountered a Terran medical frigate. Expecting a modest crew, the Concord hailed them with cautious authority. What they found unsettled them more than war. The humans had docked not for battle, but to provide aid, medicine, food, repairs to refugees of a collapsed star system. Species who had once scorned the Terrans now wept under their care. Soldiers carried children of other races in their arms. Engineers rebuilt shelters without asking payment. To the Conquered observers, it was an image far more terrifying than fleets or armies. For here was the proof of what the Shay had said. Humanity did not fight only for themselves. They fought for meaning, for connection, for others. And if they could inspire loyalty not just through terror, but through compassion, then perhaps no power in the galaxy could stand against them. The chamber met one final time, desperate for resolution. But the arguments had grown hollow, their words thin against the weight of what they had witnessed. Humanity was rising, and nothing the Concord decreed would stop it. Some clung to the hope of alliance, others to the fantasy of extermination, but most sat in silence, realizing that their deliberations were already irrelevant. For history did not ask permission. It marched forward, carried on the shoulders of those willing to bleed for it. And humanity bled more willingly, more fiercely, than any species the stars had ever known. In the end, the Chancellor's final decree was but a whisper. Prepare. But no preparation could truly suffice. The storm had already arrived, and its name was humanity. And so the galaxy watched, trembling, as the Terrans spread among the stars. They were not the strongest, nor the most advanced, nor the most numerous. But they were something far rarer, far deadlier, unyielding. Where others faltered, they endured. Where others broke, they adapted. Where others sought comfort, they sought challenge. They were the sum of their scars, the echo of every loss, the living proof that pain could be transformed into power. The Conquered would remember that fateful era not as the age of peace, nor the age of order, but as the age when they first realized the truth. Humanity was not coming to join them. Humanity was coming to surpass them, and perhaps in time to judge them. For the stars had gained a new apex predator, not one born of strength alone, but of relentless will, and no empire, no council, no decree could stand forever against the terrifying, inexhaustible rise of mankind.